Hi, Udmi.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi, Palash. We can start. Sorry, I'm a bit late. We can start.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Srilata. Udmi, this is
Hi, hi.
Srilata, ma'am, our patron.
Okay.
Ma'am, Srilata, ma'am, Udmi, and Palash. They are
Very good
presenting
evening
today.
to you, ma'am.
Very good evening, ma'am.
Shall we begin now?
Yes, start.
Okay. Good evening to one and all present here. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the fortnightly symposium of our In Tandem Research Club, a gathering of minds and ideas where we explore conflict, peace, reconciliation, and planetary well being, the theme for the academic year 2024-2025. Our discussion today will focus on strategies of conflict transformation in indigenous narratives, encouraging us to delve into new perspectives and explore uncharted territories. It is now my privilege to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker, Dr. Urmi Sengupta. She is an assistant professor of English at the ICFAI University, Tripura. She has been a former faculty of English at the British Institute, Kolkata. She has been awarded a PhD in comparative literature from Javadpur in translations, sorry, uh, comparative literature from Javadpur University, Kolkata. Her research interests include Canadian literature, ecocentrism, eco-criticism, gender gender, translation studies, indigenous studies, and memory studies. She has worked extensively on indigenous narratives of Canada and India and is currently supervising two doctoral candidates who are working on indigenous communities of Tripura and Nagaland. Her essays have been published in journals like Sahitya, Litcrit, the Calcutta Journal of Global Affairs, and Sankalp. She has contributed chapters in peer-reviewed volumes on eco-criticism and environment, rethinking literature and culture, and nation building, education and culture in India and Canada. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Dr. Urmi Sengupta as she takes the meet to share her knowledge and perspective. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nivedita, for that wonderful introduction. And a very good evening to all present here, Srilata ma'am, Priti ma'am, and all the respected faculty members, research scholars, and PG students. I am so honored and grateful to be invited by In Tandem Research Club of the Department of English of Queen Mary's College, Chennai. I remember being an old participant here when I was pursuing my PhD from Jadavpur University. I had presented a paper here, so it seems as if life comes a full circle when you're invited as a keynote lecturer here. So my grateful wishes, and with that, I would like to begin my lecture. I have a PPT. Just give me a moment to share that. Is the PPT visible?
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Uh, so, firstly, I would like to say that the entire topic of this year's In Tandem has fascinated me with a particular reference to the broad topic that has been identified for today's session, the strategies of conflict resolution, the strategies of conflict transformation in indigenous narratives. Conflict has been a part and parcel of indigenous communities across the world, I believe, because most of them are having similar socio-political problems that they have been facing across centuries, because most of them have been marginalized communities within their own respective geopolitical domains. So today I would be speaking on the Canadian Indigenous communities, who might be called Native Canadians, Indigenous Canadians, or Aboriginal Canadians. We do not use the word tribal in the context of Canada. So these are the terms we would be sticking to. The title of my lecture is Stories Placed and Displaced: Reclamation of Collective Memory as a Strategy of Conflict Transformation in the Indigenous Narratives of Canada. Now, let me tell you in the beginning, many of you might be knowing. For people who do not know or may not have a complete idea about this, Canada is generally identified as a first world nation with a high economic prosperity. It is identified as a land of promise, and generally people believe that it is a country where everything is going well. For people from the global south like us, we generally have this belief. But we should keep in mind that there are countries like Canada, United States of America, Australia, and New Zealand, which are identified as settler colonies of different European countries. In the case of Canada, it would be a settler colony of both France and England. So, what is the difference between settler and non settler colonies? India used to be a non settler colony, and other countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, etc., used to be non settler colonies when they were occupied by the British. So, non settler colonies basically refer to colonies where the British or the colonial community would come in small numbers as administrators, as military personnel, or for business purposes, and administer the country. Basically, the country would be inhabited by the original people of the land. But in the case of the settler colonies, the colonizers actually left their mother countries and relocated in large numbers in the new countries. So if you have to relocate in a new place, you have to remove the original inhabitants of that land from their own locations. So in the case of Canada as well, when colonization began sometime in the late 15th, early 16th century, the first thing that the British and the French colonizers did was that they tried to remove, and they were quite successful in that, they tried to remove the native Canadians, the native population of Canada, who had been occupying various parts of southern Canada, which is the only inhabitable area, because Canada, you must be knowing, is a temperate area. It is a very cold country filled with forests and wildlife, and the Rocky Mountain goes through it. So it is not a very inhabitable country, especially in the northern part. So the southern part was occupied by the native Canadians, and they were removed from there. They were actually restricted within certain places known as reservations. Their land rights, their hunting, fishing, gathering rights were taken away from them. And basically, they were deprived of practicing their culture. Their language was taken away from them. They were put in certain residential schools where a lot of cultural assimilation with the Europeans was taking place. And most importantly, the country was named Canada after the word Acanada. The word Acanada is a Spanish word which actually means nothing here. So by naming the country, the British colonizers and the French colonizers were actually trying to erase the entire history of native Canadian settlement there, by saying that it used to be a barren land and it was just occupied by the colonizers because nobody else was there. So this is the history with which native Canadian literature or indigenous Canadian literature begins its journey. So I have included a small Facebook post from one of the major early native Canadian writers by the name of Lee Maracle. She's a Salish Cree writer. Unfortunately, we do not have her with us anymore. So this is a Facebook post. She shared a few months before she passed away. This is, as you can see from the date, this was during the COVID period when the second wave of COVID hit the world, which was the worst wave, I suppose. So she's talking about the devastation that the entire world is facing because of the pandemic, and she makes a strange observation that now that people are losing so much of lives, now they must be able to understand the situation that the native Canadians have been going through, because they have been subjected to so much of torture and mass genocide in different formats, that their population has come down from 1 million to 10,000. So, this is a new kind of horror for the mainstream people, but for the indigenous people, this has always been their reality. So, memory studies is one of the new areas of academia which has been emerging in the recent times, which has been focusing on the importance of memory, importance of subjective memory and individual memory and collective memory in understanding past. So, a theoretician by the name of Patrick Hutton makes a breakthrough in the memory studies domain when he says that one of the major areas of contention in the case of conflict and conflict transformation would be the acknowledgement that the memory of the marginalized communities are often repressed or distorted or misrepresented, and often these people are not allowed to express their individual memories in favor of the official discourse of history. Now, we have a tendency to consider whatever is written and published in books to be the truth, the monolithic entity of truth. But we should keep in mind that history can also be subjective. It can also come from the perspective of why can it generally comes from the perspective of the power center, the oppressor, the colonizer, and therefore the projection of the marginalized indigenous communities in history has always been biased from the perspective of the colonizers to satisfy their colonial propaganda. And one of the major issues has always been that these communities have been primarily oral. They have inculcated their traditional knowledge within their collective memory, passed down across generations through oral storytelling processes, mainly because their communities did not have a concept of writing. Most of their native languages did not have any script culture. So therefore, the colonizers could easily brand them as being primitive because they did not have history in the documented form. So therefore, they were primitive, pre-modern people that would translate to they were uncivilized, savage, barbarian people, and that automatically gave them justification of colonizing them. It became as if the white man's burden to colonize them, to civilize them, and by default take away their independence. So this paradigm needs to be questioned in the very beginning, that history is always authentic and memory is always inauthentic, especially when we are looking at the indigenous narratives. So here I've shared with you a very interesting insight. We know that the North American continent, the discovery of the North American continent is credited to the European explorer Christopher Columbus. In 1492, he supposedly landed in the North American coast, and he named some of the native Canadians and Native Americans Red Indians, the name which still sticks to them, though it is a politically incorrect term, and we should technically now call them First Nations people because this is the term they prefer. So, what if it is reversed and it is said that the indigenous people actually discovered Columbus lost in sea? If we look at the narrative from the indigenous perspective, this is how it would look. So this brings me to a very important and necessary intervention that should be done. What is that intervention? Uh, we need to acknowledge that indigenous ways of life, including their perspective of history, their historical consciousness, their notion of time, their orality, their collective memory, are all authentic sources of looking at their past, and it is therefore very important to preserve, transmit, and perpetuate their collective memory. How to do that? Now, till the 1970s, there was nothing called Indigenous Canadian literature. It was only in the mid 70s that a group of new generation writers like Maria Campbell, Lee Maracle, whom I have just referred to, and Janet Armstrong rose to prominence. They created literatures which were written in the colonizers' language, that is either in English or in French. They obviously used the medium of the colonizers, that is writing, but they took care to inscribe their oral traditions embedded in their collective memory within that their written literature, so that they remain alive, so that they are not lost. And this politics of history writing and this politics of oral written binary always continues to be questioned. So this leads me to the central issue of the entire lecture, that is conflict transformation. Now, as we all know, conflict cannot be dealt with directly in many cases. These indigenous people who have been struggling for their survival, who do not have enough economic security, who do not have enough cultural capital, let alone any political powers, are not always in a position to go for direct political confrontations, armed violence, even peaceful demonstrations and political activism can be problematic for them, because they might be, jailed and fined and punished using different laws, because after all, the lawmakers are the colonizers, right? So in the cases where direct political activism is never one of the routes to conflict transformation, we all know the power of pen always works. So writing, literature, poetry, novel, short stories are often having more power, actually. Cultural protest is having more power in transforming people's thought processes, transforming people's minds, than direct political activism. So this lecture is all about looking into the role of collective memory in shaping cultural reclamation as a tool of conflict transformation against colonial atrocities. It is also very important to look at the subversive potential of cultural memory in resisting the erosion of identity and political disempowerment that has plagued the Native Canadian existence for centuries. So, this subversive potential is also the very reason why collective memory is inscribed within the written literary forms, and why we need to engage with them. So the two writers I'm looking at, the first one is Lee Maracle, whom I've already mentioned through the Facebook post. Now she, as I've mentioned, she's a Salish Cree writer who unfortunately is no longer with us. She's also a storyteller and activist. Here I will share with you a very personal anecdote. As you can see, this is a photo. Lee Maracle is in the center. The person at the right is a much younger version of me. I used to be a PG first year student at the Department of Comparative Literature, Jadavpur University at that point of time. So Lee Maracle had kindly visited our Center for Canadian Studies for one of her seminars. I was yet not introduced into Canadian studies. I was too young for that. So Maracle actually performed one of the oral narratives that she had incorporated into one of her short stories. And it was not a storytelling, it was a performance. She used her entire body, she used her eyes, her expression, her hair. And, it was a beautiful, graceful way in which she performed the entire story. And I was fascinated. And that was the first time I was introduced to any kind of indigenous storytelling, because frankly speaking, till then I did not have any idea about the Indian indigenous storytelling versions as well, though now I have a fair idea. And that is one of the turning points when I decided that I would take up Canadian studies as my special paper in my master's, and then I went on to work with it during my doctoral research as well. So this is Lee Maracle, and the other writer is Janet Armstrong. Thankfully, we still have her with us. I have met Armstrong virtually, but unfortunately not physically. I would have liked to have a similar photo with her. So she's a Okanagan writer, storyteller, painter, educator, and publisher. Both these two communities, Salish and Okanagan, they belong to the coastal area of Canada, the western coast of Canada in the British Columbia province, which is adjacent to the Pacific Ocean. So both of them they belong to the river-based and water-based, sea-based communities. So the two novels that I have taken up for the discussion, these are just reference points to discuss Indigenous literatures of Canada, because it is otherwise very difficult, is Raven Song, published in 1993 by Lee Maracle, and Whispering in Shadows, published in 2000 by Janet Armstrong. So here I have also shared another personal photo of my Canada visit in 2019. I had actually visited Maracle a second time. She used to be one of of the major teachers and educators at the First Nations House in Toronto, Canada. So this is just outside her office. This painting has been done. It represents a raven, mainly the raven in the Raven song. Though technically the raven is a black bird, but this is a kind of indigenous representation of that. So I've shared that image with you. I've also shared in the inset a painting by Janet Armstrong. As I've told you, she is a professional painter. So this is a relief painting by her which depicts the close relationship that the indigenous communities of Canada share with nature. So the two novels that I have taken, both of them are coming of age stories of indigenous female youth. What is their speciality? They are all schooled in Western education. They understand English better than their native languages. They have ambitions. Stacy from Raven Song, she is planning to become a scientist after completing her school education. She's planning to leave her village behind. She's a 17-year-old Salish girl. From Whispering in Shadows, the female protagonist, Penny Jackson, she's a Okanagan woman in her mid-30s. She has already turned herself into a Western painter. She has left her Okanagan village behind and has settled down in a township colony where she's struggling to make ends meet as an apple picker because she will not be accepted very wholeheartedly by the mainstream Canadian community as a successful painter. Both of these two entities are trying to negotiate between their traditional identity, whether they should stick to their cultural roots or they should, accept the colonial intervention and become a part of the mainstream community. So both these two individuals come from two communities in crisis. Stacy's community is at that point suffering from influenza epidemic. Epidemic, as we know, is a smaller version of pandemic, so many people lose their lives. So it is an influenza pandemic of 1954 that her community is suffering from, and Penny's community is also suffering from the onslaught of industrialization, urbanization, which has destroyed the Okanagan landscape. So it is also about how these two individuals are combating with those communal crises. So how does collective memory help in this whole process? We would see that Miracle is discussing in detail how women in the community just sit around the kitchen table, discussing, sharing each other's oral narratives and trying to find problems to the solutions to the problems that the community is facing during this point of time. And Janet Armstrong actually begins her novel by invoking the voices of her grandmothers, her ancient female ancestors, who would actually come down and help her with her storytelling process. So as you can see in the inset, this used to be a traditional oral narrative storytelling session in the village square. The village elder, generally who used to be a woman, would sit, and around her the youngsters of the village would sit and the stories would be shared. So what kind of stories were generally found in the indigenous communities of Canada, or rather are still found? There may be ancestral stories which talk about the achievements of the ancestors. There might be creation stories. They have their own spiritual understanding. They do not have institutionalized religion like Hinduism or Islam or Christianity, but they have their own spiritual understanding, and within those spiritual understandings are embedded their creation stories. They have concepts of ceremonial songs and performances which are performed during ceremonies like funerals or birthing or marriage or Thanksgiving or those kind of things. And this Thanksgiving is thanking the nature, not the Christian Thanksgiving. Also dream quests, where the community elders would basically have going into a trance and finding solutions to the community's problems within those trances. These are not dreams as in you fall asleep and have those dreams. These are spiritual kind of dreams. And finally, the trickster tales. So who were these tricksters? These tricksters, as you can see in the inset, firstly I've shared the image of the raven trickster, after whom the novel Raven Song is named. And the other one is the coyote trickster, who is based on the prairie wolf spirit. This coyote trickster is very strongly found in Whispering in Shadows. So these are anthropomorphic animal spirits who have gender and form variability, and one of the major abilities they have is to protest against different kinds of wrongdoings using laughter and humor. Now, laughter and humor are two integral aspects of Canadian storytelling technique. It is generally believed that through humor you can register certain protests. Laughter and humor has a certain amount of subversive potential. potential, which cannot be found in other methods of storytelling. If you tell someone something in the gesture of humor, even if it is offensive, people might not take offense. So this is one of the major methods by which indigenous storytelling often tries to resist the onslaught of colonization. Also, as you can understand, the village elders, particularly the village women, I will point out why the village women are so important in the next slides. The village elderly women are very important because they are the repositories of the oral knowledge. They pass it down across generations through oral storytelling. So anything which is retained in the memory, remembrance, or remembering becomes the central issue of that. The act of listening is very important. The people who are, listening to the stories and retaining it in their memory. And also the stories are marked by the ability of open-endedness and multiple interpretation. Now, what is that? In many of the novels, we would encounter the same story being narrated by different characters in the novel, and each of the versions have a different ending, maybe, or maybe a slight difference. Why is that? This is to show that stories can have a pluralistic kind of interpretation. It actually tries to undercut the Western method of typical storytelling, where there is a conflict, then there is a climax, and there is a concrete conflict resolution at the end, where where the story can have only one end. This kind of Western storytelling technique is undercut by this oral narrative based storytelling, where stories can be told from different perspectives, and it also depends a lot on the reader's interpretation. Now, this leads me to what is the importance of these oral narratives? Why do they need to be preserved and inscribed within the written literature? Kateri Akiwenzi Dam, she is also a native Canadian writer and activist. She's an Ojibwe writer. She comes up with this very important concept that we need to move out of the cookie cutter approach. What is this cookie cutter approach? Now, we all know what is a cookie cutter, I'm sure. So if you put a cookie cutter within a DAO, every time you will create the same cookie, the same shape, same color, same texture, everything, right? So there is no difference. So this concept basically says that generally there is an uncanny tendency of the academicians to use Western theories to talk about indigenous perspectives and indigenous problems. We do not try to acknowledge that indigenous problems are different. So alternative framework of theories needs to be devised, needs to be created, through which we can look at indigenous narratives and not the typical Western narratives, Western theories. So what are the main differences in the ideas? Firstly, of course, the notion of time. We know that the indigenous communities, not only in Canada but across the world, have a different sense of time. It is circular, cyclical, value-loaded notion of time, unlike the typical linear, progressive concept of Western time, Western calendrical time. They have a deep-rooted relationship with nature, where they consider nature to be a part of their family, their relatives, and not as a mere source of survival like mainstream communities would do. The dynamics of gender is mostly different. Majority of the indigenous communities across the world and all the indigenous communities of Canada are essentially matrifocal and matrilineal. Remember, they are not matriarchal. So matrifocal and matrilineal means obviously the woman, the mother, is at the center, and the name of the child inherits the name from the mother, inherits the property from the mother. So a completely different gender dynamics goes on within the society. And also this leads me to the important concept of how the oral narratives basically encapsulate within themselves the concept of collective mentalities. What is collective mentalities? So there are theoreticians like Jacques Legoff who would point out that collective mentalities is basically a combination of the commingled beliefs, practices, images, myths, and values recognized and tolerated by a particular society and community. So if we look at the oral narratives embedded within the within the collective cultural memory, we would see that it is reflecting all these collective mentalities that I've just discussed in this slide only. So it is very important to hold on to those collective mentalities in the face of the onslaught of colonial oppression. So I was talking about the important concept of women having an important position in the society. The women in the indigenous communities, in the Salish and Okanagan communities, are generally known as the keepers. Who are these keepers? They have the ability to create, nurture, and sustain new life. Moreover, they have the ability to safeguard the survival secrets of nature, how to pick the good berry, how to get the good fish from the pond, how to hunt the perfect animal during the right season. They have these ideas, and they also are blessed with this concept of acting with responsibility and responsibility towards nature, that is never over exploiting nature and maintaining a proper ecological balance. So this very strong idea of indigenous ecofeminism, which is largely different from mainstream ecofeminism, is strongly reflected in both the two novels, which are also encapsulated within Lee Maracle's idea of I Am Woman and Janet Armstrong's idea of soft power, where they say that as women are being disempowered by the infiltration of patriarchal values through colonization, as there is an imposition of Christianity, there are impositions of the concepts of sin, shame, chastity, and there is an abuse and objectification of the indigenous woman in the eyes of the male colonizer. They are being disempowered, and nature is also losing its ability to sustain and survive through so much of urbanization and industrialization. Both women and the nature need to be empowered together. They need to be given back their voice. So that strong message is delivered through both the novels. Another very important issue is the idea of the performative. Now, oral storytelling does not always consist of the process of storytelling. The performative, as I have described while talking about Lee Maracle's performance, that is using your entire body to do something, to emote, to express our oral narrative, is also very important. So in the case of these two stories also, we see the not only the oral entering the written, but also the performative entering the written. How is that possible? Penny Jackson, as I've told you, is a woman who is far removed from her community. She lives in the urban setup, but she repeatedly calls upon the berry picking experiences of her great grandmother, Tupa Susapen, how she used to pick the berries, that is embedded within her oral collective memory narratives, and she uses those narratives to act with gentleness when she's picking up the apples as apple picker. She makes sure that the apples are not hurt, the apple tree is not hurt while she is picking the apples. On the other hand, her white partner, who doesn't have these sensibilities, is very insensitive. He breaks the branches and he hurts the tree while doing it. On the other hand, in Stacy's community, which is suffering from the epidemic and many people are losing their lives, one of the best ways to come in terms with this grief is through grief songs. Now, grief songs exist in many of the indigenous communities across the world. So the grief song is all about expunging your grief. It has a cathartic effect on the individual. It is accompanied not only by the sound, the song, the rhythm, but also by dance movements, to and fro, backward and forward movement of the body, and very importantly, certain musical instruments like the drum beat, which you can see in the inset. This is a typical Salish drum. So the community members of Stacy's family, Stacy, her mother, her aunt, her sisters, and many other female relatives are all performing these grief songs and trying to expunge their grief through this process. Had this process not been there, maybe they would not be able to deal with so much of loss of their dear ones. The final point that I would like to talk about, the one which I had begun with, I had told the audience that these women, these native Canadian writers, are all writing in the language of the colonizer. And why are they being forced to do so? Firstly, because their native languages do not have a script culture. So even if they want to, they cannot write in the Salish or the Okanagan language. Moreover, they also want to deliver certain messages. Certain acts of protest needs to be registered, which needs to go to the notice of the colonizers as well. So if they are writing in their native languages, only their community people would be able to read it. So these people want their literatures to reach masses beyond their own community, to the colonizers, and even people outside the domain of Canada like us, who in most of the cases have no idea that a community of native Canadians exist in Canada, let alone the fact that they have been colonized and mistreated for such a long time. But even then, this idea remains very strongly in their heart, that this is a language of the colonizer. This is a language which has been forcefully imposed upon them through the residential school system. This is a language of the oppressor. This is not the language of their heart. So they would often incorporate their native language words, terminology, phraseologies and phrases to register their active protest. They would also often break down the grammatical structure, the syntactical structure of the English language, also play around with the spellings, distort the spellings, not because they do not know the spellings, but they're deliberately doing it as an act of protest. You can see I've shared a small section from Miracle, one of Miracle's poems, where she deliberately spells the word English as Inklish to mention that this is not her own native language. There are also references in Raven's song where, after losing many lives in the pandemic, in the funeral processions, there's an elder by the name of Ella who delivers a funeral speech where she's talking about the importance of rain. She says that in the Western concept, the rain is just certain balls of dust which are carried and carried by nature, and when they become too heavy, they just fall down. But in the indigenous Salish language, the word rain has a far greater significance. It is talking about the tears of pain of Mother Earth when she's giving birth. So the meaning is far more profound, far more philosophical, and she says that unless we use the native Salish word for rain, we cannot be communicating what I'm exactly trying to mention. Even in the Okanagan language, we see that sky and breath have the same word. So when the sky is polluted, when the air is polluted by the toxic fumes of the industries created by the British and the French people, the fresh oxygen is getting depleted, and the indigenous communities are facing several health issues. We see at the end of the novel that Penny Jackson is suffering from the last stages of throat or lung cancer, and she dies. So somewhere she's trying to grapple with the difference with the lack of difference between these two words, sky and breath, and she believes that had this lack of difference also been there in the language of the English, the language of the colonizers, maybe so much of environmental exploitation would not have taken place. So this brings me to the end of my lecture today. So I would like to point out the 5 R words, which are extremely important. The order has not been given correctly, unfortunately. I'll try to do that. So firstly is the word resilience. Resilience is the ability to sustain with patience all the sufferings that colonization has imposed upon these native Canadian or indigenous Canadian communities. Second is an active attempt to recuperation from the scars and the wounds that have been inflicted by colonization. Third, that would lead automatically to a stage where the people can resist against colonial oppression, and they have started to do that actively through literature, and even in these days, in the recent times, through political activism as well. Next would obviously come the idea of reclamation. Reclaiming what? Reclaiming their cultural identity, their political identity, their social identity, and their very traditional culture embedded within their oral traditions, because that is what that has been jeopardized most by the Western education system. And if all these go on well, step by step, then this would obviously lead to their re-empowerment, which is a much important process. I'll be very honest with you. As much as my knowledge goes, this re-empowerment, a complete re-empowerment, is very far away. We do not even know any date in near future when this complete re-empowerment will be finally possible, and it will finally only be possible when Canada reaches a post-colonial state, a complete post-colonial state, and we have no idea when that would be possible. But even then, these small steps, these small attempts towards re-empowering them, I think is a huge deal in the history of Native Canadian struggles, Native Canadian conflict transformation attempts. And I would like to end my lecture with this favorite quote I have of Lee Maracle. I began the lecture with a quote from Maracle, and I end it with another one from her. It is in this quote that we see the spirit of the indigenous Canadian people of never to give up. She says that life has given me so many rocks, that is so many hurdles and adversities, but I prefer to, instead of complaining and instead of giving up and instead of accepting defeat, I prefer to dance over them. So this is the kind of spirit, even here she has this positive transformative spirit, that whatever adversities she would face, she would dance through it. So as a person outside Canada, as a complete community outsider to any indigenous community, but as a person who has been working extensively in this area, I would like to end this lecture with a salute to the spirit of these indigenous communities, both outside India and also within India. I believe we are going to hear a presentation on India's indigenous communities after this. Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful, meaningful presentation. Such complex ideas that you've condensed into simple words that we can understand. Someone who's completely new to this topic. So, thank you so much for that, ma'am. And I know there are questions and doubts about this topic, but we will follow this after our paper presentation. So I kindly request you to take down the notes and save your queries for the Q&A section later. So paper presenter for today's session is Mr. Palash Biswas. He is a PhD research scholar at the Department of Adivasi Studies, Vidyasagar University, Midnapur in West Bengal. The researcher has written articles on wide range of topics published in scholarly journals. His area of interest include medieval and Elizabethan literature, Victorian literature, modern and postmodern literature, post-colonial literature, African American literature, Indian English literature, Dalit and tribal studies, Bengal Dalit literature, tribal literature, cultural studies, ritual studies, folklore, mythology, women's writing and translation studies, eco-criticism, posthumanism. I welcome you, sir, to take over the meet.
Thank you, ma'am. Am I visible, ma'am?
No, sir, you're not.
Oh, actually, let me just. Is it visible now?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
Okay. Actually, my camera is not working properly. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. Um, Thank you, Urmi Shengupta ma'am. I was very much influenced by your talk, and I'm very privileged to hear you from this platform, Tandem. Now, and thank you once again, ma'am, Nivedita ma'am, for the beautiful introduction, for the wonderful introduction. So it is my privilege to present my paper here, and I look forward to engaging in fruitful discussions with you all. Just give me a moment. I would like to share my PPT. Is the PPT visible, ma'am?
yes, sir, it's visible.
Should I start?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
yes.
Thank you. The title of my paper is Healing Through Words, Conflict Transformation in Select Indigenous Poetry of Marshall Hembrow and Jacinta Kerketa. Now, as it was proposed by Dr. Urmila Sengupta, and she was talking about conflict transformation, and through her speech, we can adhere that conflict emerges as a natural part of existence, and instead of perceiving conflict as a danger, we can view it as a chance for growth and a means of enhance our understanding of ourselves, others, and the social structure around us. Conflicts in relationships at all the levels serve as opportunities for us to pause, evaluate, and become aware of our circumstances. One effective approach to understanding our humanity is acknowledging the valuable role that conflict plays in our lives. Without this element, our existence would resemble a dull and unvaried landscape, and the depth of our connections would be regrettably shallow. Now, conflict catalyzes life. It prompts us to respond, innovate, and evolve. Conflict catalyzes change, ensuring relationships and social structures remain authentic, vibrant, and actively attuned to human needs and aspirations and development. Now, justifying the act of writing poetry by Adivashi poets or indigenous poets in India as a means for conflict transformation involves examining how poetry served as both a tool of resistance and a pathway to healing for Adivashi poets, and they have historically experienced systematic deprivation, identity erasure, sociocultural marginalization, and poetry becomes a powerful platform to voice their struggle and assert their identities. Now, conflict transformation is a crucial concept in understanding how Adivashi communities navigate and respond to the disruptions caused by the modernity, political upheavals, and cultural assimilation. The poetry of Marshall Hembrom and Jacinta Kirketta offers profound insights into strategies of conflict transformation employed by the Santal and the Orao Adivashi communities in West Bengal and Jharkhand, respectively. Now, my paper examines how their poems articulate an experience of displacement, cultural hybridization, and the quest for identity and justice. Now, let me introduce you to the poets. Marshall Hembrom and Jacinta Kirketta. Marshall Hembrom is a poet from West Bengal. She is known as Purimal Hembrom and she writes under the pen name Marshall Hembrom. She was born in 1957 on the second day of February in a Santal family. And later he joined as an India program executive in 1989 and retired from his service as assistant director in 2017. Basically, he used to write in his mother tongue, Shantali, under the pen name Marshall Hembro. He translated his own poems into Bengali language. He wrote many essays on tribals, particularly on Santals and their language, literature. He delivered many lectures on above subjects organized by renowned organizations in West Bengal. He got his book Shantali Sahityer Itihash, The History of Santal Literature, a unique research work published in 2007. And in addition to it has contributed many articles in highly reputed journals, magazines in Bengali. He wrote the short history of Jharkhand in Bengali entitled Jharkhandir Sankipto Itihash or Brief History of Jharkhand, published in 2001. On the other hand, Jacinta Kirketta, born in 1983, is an Indian Hindi language journalist, poet, and activist from Jharkhand, and she is from Orao Adivashi community. Her poetry and journalism discuss the Adivashi identity of youth, protests against the systematic oppression of Adivashis in India, gender based violence, especially against women, displacement, and questions about the state's apathy of governance and Forbes India named her one of the India's top 20 self-made women. Now, these are the books by Marshall Hembrom and Jacinta Kirketta, and I have select the poems from Fight for Existence by Marshall Hembrom. It is translated by Alok Bandyopadhyay. And on the other hand, I have select poems from Anger by Jacinta Kirketta. Now, If we look at what is conflict transformation, if we look at the term, then conflict transformation is not merely about ending conflicts, but involves addressing the underlying causes and transforming the relationships and structures that perpetuate conflict. It encompasses changes in personal, relational, cultural, and structural dimensions of society. Leatherrock described it as the process that, I'm quoting from Leatherrock, that envisions and responds to the ebb and flow of social conflict as life-giving opportunities for creating constructive change processes that reduce violence, increase justice, interaction, and social structure, and respond to real-life problems in human relationships. Now, how can we find these indigenous narrative in the select poems from Marshall Hembrom and Jacinta Querqueta? I have put the poem on PPT. As you can find, the poem is All the World is a Stage by Marshall Hembrom. Now, this is a poem where Marshall Hembrom is reinterpreting Shakespeare's famous lines, All the World is a Stage, to reflect the contemporary world's violence and dehumanization. Hembrom writes, the world is a terror stricken stage. We are mask faced characters. This imagery highlights the pervasive sense of fear and loss of authentic identity due to the modern conflicts. And the metaphor of the mask suggests the enforced roles and identities that individuals must adapt in a hostile environment. And the poem's depiction of global violence symbolized the sound of the guns, the smoke of the explosion of our bombs, serve as a critique of how modern warfare and terrorism disrupt human connections and cultural identities. Hembrom's call to put off your mask, let us illuminate the stage is an appeal for a written authenticity and humanity, a fundamental aspect of conflict transformation where reclaiming true identities and fostering genuine relationships are crucial. In the next poem of Marshall Hembrom, named as title as Transcendence, Hembrom addresses the limitation of violent resistance and emphasizes the transformative power of education. He argues fighting is not the way to development, it is education that leads to transcendence. The poem acknowledges the historical reliance on traditional weapons like bow and arrow, and the modern arms, revolver and gun, but ultimately asserts that true empowerment comes through knowledge and education. This perspective aligns with conflict transformation emphasis on addressing structural and cultural dimensions. By advocating for education, Hembrom suggests a path to empowerment that transcends violent conflict and fosters sustainable development. This strategy also involves adapting a contemporary realities, that is, adorning yourself with the attire of time while maintaining the cultural integrity. Now, the next poem that is taken from Jacinta Querqueta's Angor, named as Nameless Villages. Now, here, in Nameless Villages, Jacinta Querqueta captures the erasure and marginalization of indigenous communities. This poem describes ancient, unnamed villages that draws each breath in the silence of darkness, and this imagery evokes a sense of invisibility and disposition, as these communities remain unrecognized and unrecorded by mainstream society or the dominant culture. This poem contrasts the indigenous way of life with the destructive impact of modern development, symbolized by majestic chariots and exploding dynamites. Kirketas lament that the long buried iron ages are unearthed, while the spores of hundreds of nameless villages remain lost, underscores the selective resemblance and erasure perpetuated by dominant narratives. The poem calls for a reclamation of indigenous histories and identities, a crucial aspect of conflict transformation that involves recovering and valuing marginalized voices and experiences. And in the next poem, the poem is named as When Will Time Raise Its Voice? And here in this poem, When Will Time Raise Its Voice? Kirketa powerfully depicts the exploitation and dehumanization faced by indigenous communities. Here, she used a picture, a corpse beneath a half burnt pyre, and the scent of fresh newborns. These imagery juxtaposes life and death, highlighting the cyclical nature of exploitation and resilience. Cricketer's vulture symbolizes predatory forces preying on vulnerable communities, both literally and metaphorically. And here in this poem's climax, where Kirketa questions, will it time raise its voice and rise to claim its true rights? Reflects a yearning for justice and recognition. These call to action embodies the oppressive structure, and the imagery of young bones deep in slumber awakening with a thunder signifies a collective awakening and mobilization towards justice. Now, after justifying these four poems of these indigenous poets, namely Marshall Hembrom and Jacinta Kirketta, we can come to a conclusion of strategies of conflict transformation, how and these transformation, how they are employed in the indigenous narratives, especially in poetry. Now, the poems of Hembrom and Kirketta reveal several key strategies of conflict transformation in indigenous narratives. First, as Nan was saying, she was saying about reclaiming. And in this poem, both the poets emphasize the importance of reclaiming and asserting authentic identities in the face of imposed rules and dehumanization. Hembrom's call to put off your mask and Kierkegaard's description of nameless villages highlight the need of indigenous communities to reclaim their histories and identities. And next, the strategy was that was or that were strategies were employed by these poets, emphasizing education and knowledge. Now, Hembrom's poem Transcendence advocates for education as a means of empowerment and development. And this strategy aligns with the conflict transformation focus on addressing structural injustices and fostering sustainable change through the knowledge and education. Here is a critique on modernity and development. These poems critique the destructive impact of modern development and political upheavals of indigenous communities, and Kerketa's nameless villages and Hembrom's depiction of the global violence highlight the need of challenge and transform the structure that perpetuate marginalization and exploitation. Valuing indigenous history and experience are very important while talking about the strategies in indigenous narratives. Here, the both poets emphasize the importance of valuing the perspective indigenous histories and experiences. Kirketer's depiction of ancient villages and Hembrom's chronicling elders' narratives underscore the need of recover and honor marginalized voices. And lastly, the mobilizing collective action. Kirketer's call for to raise to his voice and Hembrom's appeal for authenticity and humanity highlights the importance of collective awakening and mobilization towards justice. The strategy involves fostering solidarity and collective action to challenge oppressive structures and asserts rights. Now, the poetry of Marshall Hembrom and Jacinta Kirketa provides found insights into the strategies of conflict transformation employed by the indigenous communities in West Bengal and Jharkhand, respectively. Through their vivid imagery and powerful narratives, these poets articulate the experiences of displacement, cultural hybridization, and the quest for identity and justice. Their works reveal the importance of reclaiming authentic identities, valuing indigenous histories, emphasizing education, critiquing modernity, and mobilizing collective action in the process of conflict transformation. As indigenous narratives continue to shape our understanding of conflict and resistance, the voice of the poets like Hembram and Kirketa remain crucial in envisioning and creating a more just and equitable world. I have selected four poems only, but all the poems from these two anthology, Fight for Existence and Hunger, all are creating a picture of conflict transformation, where we can say, likely, as Urmi ma'am said, resilience, recuperation, resistance, reclamation, and rearmament. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biswas, for making us understand a bit about Adivasi narratives through the poems of Hembram and Kirkata, the importance of reclaiming their identity, histories, education, and collective action for the justice and sustainable transformation of the Adivasi communities. Now the floor is open for discussion. Any questions and queries are welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Urmila Sengupta and Palash Biswas for your presentations. They were excellent. The keynote, I think, brought out every aspect of today's theme, and I think it was so lucid and so well put. I think all our students, as she Nivedita already said, I think everybody would have, I think, got an idea of what it is to be an indigenous person, in whether it is in free India or in First Nations. I have a question to Ms. Urmila, and before that, I'd like to, thank Palash Biswas for taking up poetry. I always thought that only the northeastern states, people expressed in poetry, because I express themselves in poetry. I've only read short stories of the Santals. Okay, so far I have read only their cause, and I did not know there were so many empowered people writing, asking for justice. Miss Urmila, Mrs. Urmila Sengupta, I just want to ask this. You have been to Canada, right? And you talked about, they were that the First Nations people are trying to reclaim their identities. What are some of the ways in which they are doing it? I just wanted to ask that, because we've read stories in which they tell this. They pass on their cultural, aspects to their children. That's main, Armstrong and people like that. That's what I mean. We've been exposed to a few, and we just wanted to know, even all those stories about the Roadrunner. What is that? What do they call coyote stories? Yeah, they are very very inspiring. Actually, a very nice way of presenting. Maybe resistance. Everything comes in through those stories too. I just want to know whether people in the First Nations people, the few Inuits, I think, who remain, are they? Are there any of them who have taken a place in the government, present day government, and are doing things for the people? You mentioned that they have a long way to go to get totally empowered, but there should be at least one or two, because in from our communities we even have languages. From in India we have the Santalis, and I think some Ho, like some other languages, people are allowed to write even IAS in that tribal language, right? So, do they? I just want to know whether they have any part in the government, any say in not only their own what you call future, but also in the making of Canada.
Firstly, Srilata ma'am, thank you for your inspiring words. And yes, I did not really touch upon their civil rights or their actual political activism, whether they have gone for that. So, firstly, to answer your question, there have been some very important political movements. For example, firstly, Srilata ma'am, since she mentioned, let me clarify. The First Nations people are also the Red Indians, and the Inuits, whom she mentioned, Inuits are also better known as Eskimos. So we may not know about the First Nations or the Inuits, but most of us have heard about the Red Indians and the Eskimos. So they are the same people. This is particularly for the students that I have mentioned. So, secondly, the important political movements where they have actually resisted. First one is the Red Power movement. This took place sometime in the 1970s when these writers had started to write. This was the first political movement that they were fighting for, mainly for their voting rights. So, now let me tell you, they have got their voting rights after a lot of battle. The next would be there is this issue of the missing and murdered indigenous women, because many of the women, as I have told in my lecture, have faced rape, abuse, and these kind of things. And there, when they just vanish out of thin air because there are no proper police reports. Their families are not in a social and economic situation to pursue their disappearance. Why has this been happened? To seek legal help. So there have been in the recent times a lot of movement in and around this missing and murdered indigenous women. So people are trying to gain more social security and rights for the indigenous women of Canada. There has also been a movement called the Oka Crisis, which took place in the 1990s. This happened when one of the burial grounds of one of the indigenous communities was forcefully taken over by the colonizers and turned into a golf course. So they were outraged about it because, as you know, this is their spiritual beliefs are involved with the burial grounds. So what they did is that they organized a peaceful resistance. They were just holding hands, making a human chain. No violence was involved, and they were just making a peaceful demonstration against the government. But the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were instructed to open fire on them. So many innocent, non-violent protesters died in the process, and that movement actually gained immense global coverage through the international media, and that took up a huge larger than life stature, and that really helped the indigenous people to fight for their rights. Recently, a committee has been created in the late 90s called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which deals with how the indigenous children has been mistreated over 150 years in the residential schools. So there has been a formal apology delivered by firstly the Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and recently the current Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also delivered a formal apology to the indigenous communities. It is not that the formal apologies are wiping away their pains in the past, but it is at least it has started to at least give them some kind of acknowledgement that these things have happened to them. And regarding government representation, government still, as far as I know, doesn't have any indigenous representation, though attempts are being made to incorporate indigenous individuals as a part of the government. Their languages still continue to lack the official status. The official languages in Canada are still English and French. This is mainly because their languages still do not have a script culture, so written documents are not present in their language. But again, they are still trying to fight for the rights in their languages because unfortunately these languages are not taught in the mainstream schools and colleges. But many of the residential schools have been recently turned into First Nation schools and colleges. There, these people actively try to disseminate the First Nations way of teaching, First Nations framework of education. There, they try to impart education mainly in the native languages, because what used to happen in the Western universities, most of the major Western universities in Canada had a native studies department. And in those native studies department, white professors would be teaching. Books that they would be teaching were written by white professors, and there would be no representation of the actual native Canadians. So again white colonizers would be representing them in every respect. So the native people are trying very hard to break out of that framework and introduce an alternative system of education, but it is still in the nascent stages.
Yes, so that they are even worse than, I mean, the Aborigines of Australia have managed to become, well, put their place somewhere
Yes,
in the,
ma'am.
yes,
Yes, ma'am. Even today,
yes,
I was looking at a recent news that a Maori woman has actually protested against a bill that the New Zealand government has taken out, which is taking away the Maori rights. So she has again performed in the Parliament of New Zealand, and the Parliament was called off because it was considered to be disruptive. But she's a 22-year-old Indigenous Maori woman, and she's the youngest MP in Australia and New Zealand. So
yes, yes.
they are, I think, in a better position.
Better position. Yes. Hope it happens in Canada too. But the people, I mean, I think the population is very little. Even the, I mean, white population when compared to the rest of the world is little in Canada,
Yes.
as well as I mean, the Red Indians who were fully wiped off. No,
Yeah,
almost
yeah.
all were wiped.
Almost wiped off. It is a very sparsely populated country, ma'am. Actually, you
Yes.
go for miles and then you see one house. So
Yes, yes.
that
I
is the
know I have people there.
yeah.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Thank you for answering the question for the students. Though I asked it, I meant that, of course, they should also know what all this is.
Thank you, ma'am.
Palash, I would like you to put the name of the book that you had, no, the poetry collection,
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
Yes.
One is Fight for Existence.
Hmm.
It's a Fight for Existence by Marshall Hembrom.
And how active is Jacinta? What's her name? I don't know.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am.
How active is this Jacinta? She's a journalist.
Yes, ma'am. She is a journalist from Jharkhand, Jacinta Kirketta.
Uh, Jacinta.
Jacinta Kirketta. The book is Anger, and her anthology has been translated also in German language.
German.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's also in German language, and it's a bilingual book that is available in India, Hindi and English translation side by side. But it also translated in German language. And recently she denied the award, and her denial is also part of a resistance from her community, Oral community. She belongs to Oral community, and actually I'm talking with her, and I put this book as my primary text in my research, so that I'm connected with ma'am. And she's very busy, and all the time she's organizing her community, women, the people. And mostly she struggled a lot for the violence for the women. That is very, very pathetic, that in Jharkhand, and especially in Oral
The
community, women
Aurovans
are
were
also
supposed to be,
marginalized.
the Auravan community was supposed to extend as far down as Tamil Nadu also, no? Because
Yes, ma'am.
we have
Yes,
a community that says Oravan in Tamil here.
yeah.
It must be the same community.
Yes, ma'am. It's the
Oravan,
same
it
community.
says, yeah.
It's the same community, ma'am. Presently, I was in Odisha. Then I found there is a particular community known as Khedia Shabar.
KDS.
Khedia Shabar.
The
In
Mahashweta
West Bengal,
Devi has made
yes, yes, in West Bengal, they are also Khedia Shabar, but they are known as Shabar or Khedia Shabar.
there
But
are
in
two
Odisha,
there are two
they are also known
among
as
them.
hilly areas, hilly Khedia Shabars. So
Yes.
there are some cultural differences between these two kind of community, but their origin is the same.
They are
That's the thing.
hunters. They were
That's the
hunters.
thing. And Marshall Hembrom, actually, uh, I uh, I met with him in Akashvani, Kolkata, and I took an interview of him. and he's writing also. He is a very prolific writer in Santhali language, and he wrote almost 12 books in Bengali and Santhali language, and some are being translated in present time. And that's the thing, as I took these two poems and I found so many things. Actually, I wanted to recite the poems, I wanted to read the poems for all the audience, but it was a limited time to read.
I know that
If
is
you yeah, yes ma'am, yes ma'am.
you put
But
the
ma'am, I have a question for Urmi Shengupta ma'am. May I, ma'am? Srilata
yeah,
ma'am,
yeah, go
may
ahead.
I ask a question,
Yeah, please.
Urmi Shengupta ma'am?
No. You go ahead.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, it's not just a question, it's a kind of query. As I'm working on the Adivashi studies, working on the Adivashi poets and Adivashi narratives. So, in your lecture, you mentioned that memory is a kind of understanding the past. And you also mentioned that memory is a kind of unauthentic source of some sort of things, whereas history is very authentic. History is considered very authentic. Now, do you think that experience, quote unquote experience, it can be a framework while researching on the indigenous community in India's perspective or any other kind of perspective? I'm talking about the theoretical framework. Can we take quote unquote experience as a theoretical framework while knowing better these indigenous people, while not relying on their memory, but all their ongoing process of experiences?
Well, Polash, thank you for the question. Actually, I had mentioned the reverse of what you said. You did not understand correctly. I had said that generally it is considered that history is an authentic source of the past and memory is unreliable. But if we need to create an alternative theoretical framework to study indigenous narratives, we have to understand that for them, their collective memory, their oral narratives, is the authentic source of information about their past. Because history, whatever history tells about them, who creates the history? They are not the people who write the history books, right? So every culture, the people who are in power, in the case of Canada there might be colonizers, in the case of India it is now a post colonial country, so no colonizers, but the mainstream scholars are writing the history about them generally. So there is always a bias from the power center which may not authentically represent their culture. So therefore it is very important that we rely on their collective memory, their autobiographical narratives, their testimonials, because generally it is considered that memory is subjective and therefore it is not reliable. But in the case of indigenous communities, indigenous narratives, it is this subjectivity that we are looking for, because this subjectivity often highlights certain stories of oppression, certain stories of marginalization, of loss of rights, which the mainstream history based narrative cannot give to us. Okay, so this is the answer to your question. Actually, we do need
Yes,
an
ma'am. I got
yeah,
your point, but I'm
yeah.
talking about the theoretical framework. You were proposing that we should not rely on all the time the Western theories. I'm telling about a kind of proposition that can we take experience, quote unquote experience, as a framework or not? That was my
Yeah,
question.
definitely, definitely.
Yes, yes.
Even if you talk about memory, what is that? It is the past experience of
It is the
someone, right?
experience. It
Yeah.
is the past
And if you're
experience.
talking about the
Exactly.
contemporary experience, it is that. And in this case, you also need to understand the concept of collective memory. I'm sure you do, but even then, collective memory, what is it? A person has the memories of her parents, her grandparents, her great grandparents, and so on and so forth, all the ancestors of her community. So, what are those memories? Those memories are the lived experiences of those generations. So, for example, a crisis had taken place 3 generations back in the community, and they had a method of resolving that. So, if that remains as a part of the collective memory of the younger generation, if that crisis recurs in the community or a similar crisis recurs in the community, they can look for the solutions in those collective memory, that yes, in my grandmother's generation they have solved the problem like this, maybe we can approach it like that. So that is the importance of collective memory. It is largely based on lived experiences. Okay, so
Thank you, ma'am.
that's
Thank you,
that's
ma'am.
the
That was
answer.
my question actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Also, I have something to say. Firstly, your presentation was fascinating.
Thank
I
you, ma'am.
love the fact that you belong to the Department of Adivasi Studies. I think that is a wonderful place to be. I would like to know about your research. What are you working on for your PhD?
I'm working on poetry by Adivashi poets
Okay.
and trying to find out through their poetry how they are addressing their problems and the issues, how they are creating resistance through their poetry. And Jacinta Kirketa's poetry and Marshall Hembrome's poetry are also there.
Okay. So
So through their poetry,
you're focusing on any particular region like West Bengal and Jharkhand.
I'm focusing on Eastern India, ma'am.
You are focusing on Eastern India. Okay,
In
okay.
Eastern India, ma'am.
Okay, okay. Very nice
Because there are a
presentation.
lot of works done on the northeast region, so there
Yeah,
are
yeah,
less work on eastern part, basically on West Bengal or Jharkhand
yeah.
or Assam particularly. But there are a lot of works done by so many research scholars, particularly on northeast region, likely the Mizoram or the Nagalands or the thing. Other poets also are there also available, but they are less known poets in the field of Adivashi studies. And basically, Jacinta Kirketa is also known as journalist, so her identity as a poet is somehow it's not so very much experienced by other people. That's why I have taken these poets who are less known to the others. That's why I'm talking about this
Okay.
Eastern India. I'm
Okay.
taking this region.
So, one last query. The two
Yes, ma'am.
works that you have taken for your presentation, which languages are they originally written in?
First of all, Fight for Existence, it was written in Santali. All the poems that incorporated in that anthology was in Santali originally, and later it was translated by Oleg Bantopadhyay into English.
Okay.
And Jacinta Kirketa, in her interview, she talked about that there is a kind of depression in her because she is trying to learn the language of the Urao community, of her own community. Due to her education, she had to admit it in English medium school or Hindi medium school,
Okay.
and now she is learning the Urao language, and she is very prolific in Hindi poetry writing. Originally, she wrote the poems in Hindi, and later it was translated in English and into German languages.
Okay. Okay. So, do you have any first-hand access to any Adivasi language of East India?
First in access, actually, I have a colleague who is Santal. His name is Damodar Hembram. So I started learning Santali language. And I have another poet who is from Gond community and he resides in Odisha. So I'm started learning the languages, their diction. It's very and actually the Gond poet, he's writing in Odia Magudi language. So I have to learn some script or the languages diction of Odia Magudi language. So I started learning those Santali languages and also the Odia Magudi languages.
That's very good, Polish, because if you're working on Adivasi literature, most of the people, they just take the easy way out. They just take the translations and work with that. But in your PhD research, you are supposed to have a little bit of access to the original languages because there are certain very language specific, culture specific concepts which otherwise get lost. So I'm very happy with the way you're progressing. All the very
Thank
best.
you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Palash, just one observation. So the two poets whom you have selected, they are educated, right? So they have their writings in print. What about oral literature? Could you include that in your study?
Yes, ma'am. I have to.
Because you
We have
mentioned
to.
here, sorry, I'll just I complete what I wanted to say. Because you were talking about lived experience, whether you could take that to theorize. And if you could, you know, meet people, senior people, older generation who don't have literacy but know the stories, and if you could archive it and use that to theorize, maybe
Uh,
you need to bring in voices of people who don't have literacy also.
yes,
I'm
ma'am.
just thinking aloud.
Thank you for your observation, ma'am. Ma'am, I would like to say that I have to select some primary text. That's the thing. I have to select some text. And while talking or while researching about their community, then I have to record, I have to collect so many oralities. Last years, I conducted a field work on Lodha community, Lodha people in West Bengal. The Lodhas, once they were recognized as criminal tribes by CTA Act of 1871, and though it was in 1952 uh, from Jawaharlal Nehru, it was Jawaharlal Nehru who terminated the act 1952. But the stigma they are carrying now also, and in West Bengal, while creating or while assessing their present way of living, I found that Urmi Shengupta ma'am was talking about the collective memory. That I found three generations: the elder generation, the middle generation, and the younger generation. There's a declination of preserving their orality and the Ludha languages. The younger children, they don't know the Ludha language, and the middle generation, they knew the language, but they ashamed to speak in that language because there is a kind of hybridity while reciting in Hindu dominated place, and they are adapting the Lakshmi Puja, they are adapting Durga Puja, they are adapting Kali Puja in their household areas. And I was surprised to know that when I asked them that who is your deity, then suddenly they are talking about Maranguru. But Maranguru is the deity or the prime deity of Santal people and the Assam Tea tribes peoples and other communities also. But it's the Boram Devota, the forest god, is the prime deity of the Lodha people, and they don't know, and they are getting this information for the first time from me. And I was very much surprised. And the elder generation, they were talking about their displacement. Originally they were from east or west Midnapur, and their origin also in Madhya Pradesh also. There is a kind of displacement due to the job, and their prime job is to collect the roots of some medicinal roots, or that is sold in marketplaces, which has some Ayurvedic orientation. And I recorded two songs sung by the elder generation, Bhadu and Tushu. And through their language, I found some influence of the Bengali dictions and the words. If you reside 2 days with the Lodha people, you can fluently speak in Lodha language because there are so many influences of Lodha languages and Bengali languages, or Bengali languages and Lodha languages domain. So there's a kind of mixture of their language, and I recorded their oral culture, recorded their orality, and they have certain festival during the time of winter. So I recorded all that things. And in my research, yes, I have to mention the orality because there's a particular poet from Khashi community, that is Professor Esther Siam. Now, Professor Esther Siam, she has trying to document all the oralities in from Khashi language to English language. That's the thing. So while researching, I have to mention the orality because it's the journey of the indigenous writing. It is the journey of the Adivashi people, and why they are documenting their orality because they in 21st century they started writing hardly 20 years or 25 years. Now they realized, the educated Adivashi poets or the author or the literature, they realized, or the intellectual, they realized that they must document their orality. Otherwise, the new generation, influenced by the modernity, they are not bother about their culture. In Odisha, last week when I went to a seminar, and the Santali girls and boys, they were performing a particular culture as it was a kind of Janojati, and the name of the seminar was Janojati and their Parampara and Sanskar. And that means in English, it's a tradition of the tribals or the tribe people or the indigenous people. Then I found and I was surprised that the younger generation, they were performing the Santali dance using some modern Hindi music fusions. And in that music video, there is no madal, or there is no banam, or there is no any other uh, uh, indigenous instrument. And and I lost the flavor of the Santali dances. It was a kind of Hindi, it's a kind of fusion, it's a kind of guitar, it's the kind of synthesizer, and all this happening is a kind of mixed culture. Then I was surprised. This is how they are changing. Now, the middle generation, they are trying to preserve the culture, and that is the transformation from the orality to the written. But when it is written, as it is source is in orality, we can't deny that after after writing these orality forms, the orality has been changed. No, ma'am, it is not like that. Orality has its flavor. Also, we can found in the written documents.
Yeah, and when you talk about, other influences coming in, you sound disappointed. But one thing about research is that we have to say it as it is, right?
Yes,
Uh,
ma'am. Yeah, that's true. That's true, ma'am. Ma'am, let me tell you an interesting story. Actually, I was started working on identity crisis of the Adivasis people. Then suddenly I was convinced that why there is an identity crisis. They don't have any identity crisis. If we talk about the identity crisis, then we all have that kind of identity crisis. They don't only have the right, they don't only have the compulsion that they had to bring their own traditions, bring their own cultures. And if we found some architectural differences in Santali languages in Kollani in West Bengal, it's a it's a block actually. It's a very aristocratic place in Nadia district, and in block 5 it's a Santali domain, and there are 500 Santal people living there, and they are living in a pakka houses. They are living in a constructed houses, and that is very glorious. Whenever we heard some Santal house, then there is a mental picture that yes, they have the kind of mud house, and there is a kind of alpana, or there's a kind of some drawing. No, this is if they are economically stable, then there will be change in their living, there will be change in their lifestyle. So this is not likely this. And I was convinced that no, there is no identity crisis. They are happy, they are going with the flow, and there's a certain changes. Yes, changes are also welcome, and they are documenting this. Yes, I found some disappoint, but yeah, that's true, ma'am. There's a kind of digital archiving
yeah.
of their culture. Yes, digital
Palash, I
archiving
also
is also.
wanted to, because I've also been in the area of Indigenous studies, I wanted to add that, I also appreciated Urmi, because when she was speaking about being in Canada and things, she emphasized that she was an outsider. Okay. So, when we do these studies, when you research or when you get to writing down whatever you're researching or theorizing, your position is very important. From which position are you coming? As someone belonging to the community, someone outside, someone who's trying to get back to roots. So, and that's actually a very important part of theorizing,
Yes,
because
ma'am.
the thing about what we write about indigenous people, often, unwittingly we do them a disservice. We try to speak for them, and or we theorize, and they often accuse us of getting a PhD off their backs. So always adopting being very clear about your position, and sensitive to how they would read your work. These are two things that I just wanted to share with you.
Yes,
Ma'am,
ma'am, that's true.
can I ask one question to Mr.
Hi,
Pala?
Isai.
Hello,
Yeah,
ma'am. How are you, ma'am?
good, good.
Hello, Urmi, ma'am. Thank you for that wonderful presentation, ma'am. It was nice, very informative, ma'am. Thank you. Um, Mr. Palash?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So you were mentioning about the deity worship, and as ma'am said, you are a bit disappointed. I would like to get a bit of information about that. Like, in what ways was it disappointing? Are you disappointed because of the change in deities, or are you looking forward to for the tribal people to move into a rational, scenario?
Thank you, sir, for your observation.
Because
Actually,
I feel fundamentalism is it's not good for any community. Just in my observation. Yeah, please go ahead. Sorry.
Actually, sir, change will happen as it is the nature's law. It's during the course or due to the course of the time, all the lifestyle will be changed. But I was disappointing, not like disappointing. As a researcher, I shouldn't have any such kind of things that I can impose on them. There is no scope, or there is that is very unethical that I should not impose my views or my observations. But during my field work, I recorded what I got, and the disappointing thing that uh, when we are talking about the traditions or the cultural heritage, then at least the generation, as they and another thing that they don't have any intention to get education. That's the problem with them. While displacement, their sole purpose in life is to getting the meal, getting the food for the day, and the professions of the younger or the youths, they are collecting the plastic bags, their plastic bottles from the train and the stations, and they don't have any idea that education can transform their lives. That I was saying, trying to say in my presentation, that education, that it was addressed by the Adivashi poets, Marshall Hembram, that only education can transform their lives. There is a kind of transformation. So the disappointing thing that that at least they should know about their root, that all the community or all the people should know about their root. Yes, change is always good, but with the change, if we keep on everything, if we in tradition, as T.S. Eliot was saying in his famous essay, that tradition and individual talent, that if a community, if a person has or has no knowledge about the history, about his tradition, then how could he prosper? How could he prosper in life? And it is there. It is a very interesting thing that actually past is not the past. Past is the living present, or history is the living present. So there is no history actually. We are carrying our traditions all the time. We are carrying. There is no past actually. So while taking this theory, while observation, that tradition, how we can find the tradition, then it was a kind of bit of observation. But later I just give them the information that gave them the information that yeah, it was Boram Devata that I found in the books written by Dhirendranath Baske. Dhirendranath Baske, who tried to write down the history of the Adivashis of West Bengal in his books in two parts. And while while observing this community and their traditional lives, I was actually disappointed, as because I found in the book that their deity is Boram Devata, but they don't know. That was the thing, actually.
Okay.
That was the disappointing thing, and nothing else. And I actually communicate with them off and on. I went to the place and mingle with the children, and they are very sweet. And the younger generation, they are learning so much. And the day I went there, they told me that Bengali, in Bengali, they said, "Do you know, Dada? We have a drama today." I was like, "Oh, all right, that's great. What is the name of the drama?" And they were very excited that it was a kind of against dowry. So their drama was against dowry. So that's the thing that I observed also. And thank you for observation.
Thank you, Preeti ma'am. Thank you, Srilata ma'am, for the questions.
Yeah, Palash, I'm sorry, coming
Yes, ma'am.
in repeatedly. I also wanted to say, see,
I'm on it.
Hembram has this stance that education can empower them. So, but there's a
Yes.
complexity involved. Education sometimes um, modernizes them, and there's a loss of culture. Okay, so I'm saying this purely from whatever the background of whatever little research I have done. I had interviewed C.K. Janu in Kerala. So I'm not familiar with the Santali case. So I plead ignorance, and but I'll just share with you what Janu told me. So see, in Kerala, they're asking for land, not for education. At that point of time, and if you look at the history of the Adivasi struggle in Kerala, the demand is for land which they can cultivate. And in Kerala, land is gold because of the pepper. So they want just 5 cents of land to cultivate. They want a little place where they can put their huts and cultivate land. And Janu told me this in my interview with her. She said, with all the reservation and these the Adivasi people aspiring for government jobs, what happens is they move to urban centers, urbanization, and empowerment and better lifestyle or whatever, and they don't come back. They lose touch with their roots. And then she says she one of the strong, powerful lines in that interview was she says, finally, you know what, these people, they ride a motorbike. Each man goes around with a diary under his arm, and then and all of them, if all the tribal people were to get government jobs, at the end of the day, would people eat paper and drink ink? Would people eat paper and drink ink? This is what she said, because it is the people who work on the soil. We're coming back to the agrarian crisis in India, the farmers. So we have people who work with the soil. What kind of mainstreaming, this kind of the mainstream education and mainstreaming of tribals is one complex, very complex issue. They may be economically empowered, they may get jobs as professors, but it is the Urmi and whichever Canadian First Nation, Australian Aboriginal, it is going back to the spirituality that they have with the land, the connection with the land, whether that be their spirituality, their love of nature, maintaining the ecological balance. That connection to the land, I suppose, is something central any to any indigenous group, right? Connection to land and culture. And mainstream
Yes,
education may take away from that.
yes, ma'am. Ma'am, uh, this is very true that you observed, that you just remark. Uh, if I conclude your observation in a parameter, then it is obviously indigenous knowledge system
Yes.
versus
Yes.
modernity.
Yes.
So I'm talking about it's a very vice versa relationship. And if you consider that being educated means a step forward to the modernity, and if you are convinced that modernity is a way that is prevailing, or that is avoiding their indigenous knowledge system, they are in the path of erosion of their culture. If we consider modernity in that way, then I'm truly agree with you. I found, while talking about, I was talking about Khiria Shabar people, there is a doctor in Khiria Shabar community. There is a doctor, and that doctor is a Ayurvedic doctor, is not the allopathy doctor. And there is a doctor ma'am who treated the Khiria Shabar people free of cost. And there is a indigenous doctor in that community, and they both diagnose the patient, and the result is the same. One, the doctor ma'am is checking the patients with a stethoscope, and while the indigenous doctor, he is checking the patients by pressing the belly, by other parts of the anatomy, etc., etc. And here comes the system, that is indigenous knowledge system. Indigenous knowledge system, it is found that the community which are far from the modernity, which are not so civilized, those who have not so much awareness about getting education and other things, they are the keeper of indigenous knowledge system. So yes, I'm agree with you, ma'am, that their education, that the industrialization, urbanization, all are snatching their indigenous knowledge system. It's a very complicated thing, ma'am. And when the writers are writing about resistance, about keeping their tradition, or they are lamenting over the loss of their culture, so there is the thing that what about the indigenous knowledge system? I'm truly agree with you, ma'am. I'm very much concerned about this thing also, how we can keep the indigenous knowledge system. And there is a particular way in the Shabar, Kheria Shabar people, that they are producing lime for the beetle. They are producing the lime. So one lime that we can get from the marketplace, And the Kheria Shaber people, they are producing the lime for the betel through their natural processes. So they collect the shells and they put it into the banana stem, and after some day, that shells become the lime for the betel. So this is the indigenous knowledge system, whereas we are using the lime, using the chemical
Yeah.
processes and etc. So
Actually,
thank you,
the
ma'am, for your observation. And
uh,
I have to keep in mind this thing also, how their indigenous knowledge system is endangering due to their urbanization and due to their embracing the modernity and the modern way of life.
yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for
Uh,
your
I
observation.
mean,
Thank you.
as Maria Preeti said, she said CK Janu. Today, I have contrary views about CK Janu and a group now, because in Kerala,
Oh,
the
now she has joined BJP. She's not socialist. Yeah.
no, the thing is, she's not even eco-conscious, I
True,
feel.
true. But
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
yes,
I agree. But this is the statement she made.
yes, yes. There was. See, in Kerala, people only want land. All the tribals want land. That's the problem there. And it is the mainstream people who are eco-conscious who want the tribal habitat protected, because it is still the treasure house of so much of indigenous medicine. So many tribals there are. I mean, I just see reels where they just say this is for this, or this is for that. Okay, this medicine is for, very easily they live with that. I mean, all mine now. I mean, I started reading because I went through. I mean, I worked on Mahashweta Devi, and Mahashweta Devi also, she kept herself away from the mainstream community in order to know the tribals better. I think it is the Kedia, as Polosh said, the Kedia Shabbas and all, they were supposed to be their Vana Devata. They called it the Vana Devata, whatever that is their deity. They safeguard the forests. They are actually keepers of the forest. That's what I understand. The Lodha tribes are supposed to even take a main part in the what is the Ratha Yatra of Orissa, something like that. Mahashweta Devi had mentioned. The Brahmins take on a young, I mean, the lower role, and it is the Lodha priest who who gets a higher place during that yatra, because way back in the past they say there was a story of I mean of a Brahmin priest who ran away with the deity of the Lodas or something like that. Okay, there is they know, that means they stole that kind of even the spiritual their spiritual treasures too. So I mean, people, to the more education they get, I think they choose to hide their tribal identity. Once they come up, that's why I asked Urmi ma'am whether this is going to be. I mean, there are people like that in Canada where they have come up to that level where they have forgotten their identities. Today in India, there are so many tribal community. I mean, people from the tribal communities who've forgotten their entire. Once they come up in I mean politically and attain power, they forget the community they represent, and they choose to go. I think mask all that instead of helping on bringing up to safeguard the all those indigenous knowledge, all that indigenous knowledge they have. This that is, I think, for me, the protecting the tribals means also protecting our ecosystem, the tribal indigenous knowledge of the what we call knowledge. If we lived in tune with nature, we too would have had knowledge of all those. But we've come away. We got ourselves civilized long ago, right? Those people lived with the culture, and they still, if they also forget, then everything will become new, and we'll have to learn from corporates, because they will steal this and they will make money out of it.
Okay, ma'am. Just want to point this out. It's not allopathy medicine. It's modern medicine, scientific medicine.
Yes.
And in my opinion, very soon this Ayurveda and Siddha, everything would be it'll be done. It should be done actually, because there are a lot of liver issues and other issues which come from taking these Ayurvedic medicines, because they administer these Ayurvedic medicines to children, which has alcohol in it, so which is not
No,
good. And it
no, no, not Ayurveda. You're talking about that is
no, I was just telling
Siddha
Mr.
uses
Palash. Yeah, because none of these medicines have any evidence, scientific evidence, and I think that anyone should prefer modern medicine, because it is scientific and it is proven. And
that is still debatable. Is
no,
then
no, ma'am, it is not debatable. Everything is is being put into research, and evidences are available online. And
because I was a taker of Ayurveda
yes,
till
ma'am.
I got
I understand. I understand. Even
yes.
I used to be like that. And there's one very interesting doctor from Kerala, I think. I'm not sure about his name, but
Hegde, are you talking about Hegde who gives
no, no, no. He goes by the name Liver Doc on Twitter. Twitter. You can follow and check his tweets out. He's amazing. He's doing a good job by giving a lot of
But
scientific
our
evidence.
indigenous knowledge is still the few tribals who know things. They don't choose to advertise. They don't choose to give. I mean, give it out like that. For them, it is a kind of esoteric knowledge which has to be kept hidden and given only. I think all knowledge, for that matter, should be given and divulged only as much as it is necessary for the user. If the user does not have enough, I mean, reason to take it, then that must be. See, our old doctors, they'll never tell you what medicine it is. I get irritated when I go to very old doctor because they'll say, "You take that. That's enough. That will be." What is in that? If I ask, they won't tell you. They won't tell you that.
Also in India, losing your identity is I don't know. I think it's for progress, because say when it comes to work related thing, because this is all community related work. For example, so for example, if let's take this example. There's a saloon, Green Trends. One of the the person who owns it is a Brahmin. If you think that his job was to be a priest and not no, you understand the job
Yeah,
shift,
not about.
and barber, saloon barber, and these things were once considered to be not so no respectable job. And losing identity,
Going corporate, so it's that's a corporate place.
it is good, ma'am. It is good. It gives a chance for everyone to
No, I don't agree with
freedom.
you.
No, it gives, in my opinion, it gives freedom to everyone to choose free will. Yes, ma'am. Sorry for taking
Try
the time.
calling him a barber and see whether he likes it or not.
Who, ma'am?
The person you just talked about. We don't want to be addressed directly like that, right? You like it when you are part of a corporate setup, right? The Green
Okay.
Threads is a corporate setup.
But the truth is, he is doing a barber job.
Yes, but that he doesn't. He doesn't. You try call him a barber.
Then there is something wrong with his mentality. Then that should be
Corrected.
gotten
Yes.
rid of.
There's something wrong with all our mentalities. We are still not willing to accept. We also must have been at one point. We too are from the forest. How did we come and get civilized? And now we looking down. See, that mentality has to be corrected. Acceptance We would never, what is that, call ourselves empowered and ride roughshod over another if we had all that basic culture. We had our basic cultures.
So I'm
Okay.
trying to connect all that we've been saying, and I think things pitfalls that we can avoid is essentialism of
Yes.
any kind and idealism. There's because modernity has its benefits, has its you know merits, and modernity can has its own could if we have to modernize all the time, we'd be paying a price for, we have to pay a price for modernity also. So and actually when Udmi was presenting, I was thinking of well, she, I know you intended to celebrate empowerment, reclamation and all these things, and resistance, but I was also thinking of the reservations, that there's that movie Reservation Blues. Um, and at the risk of stereotyping, the reservations are places for drugs, and because they're not connected to cities, and they are isolated, so they're not in regular employments. So and also uh, remember what Lee Maracle says, no, about the past weighing heavily on them. So that brokenness, that even Dalit coming, that brokenness is somehow uh, future generations are actually facing the repercussions of, of the past, and they are carrying so much of the injury within their own psyches. So as I say, we can't idealize. Education empowers, mainstreaming helps, economic empowerment helps, but it's also accompanied by loss of culture. So I don't think we can idealize any situation.
Yeah.
Uh,
When I
yeah,
was talking about empowerment, that was not actually about the formal education system. And what you pointed out is correct, that reservations have been identified as the hub of substance abuse and drug. Actually, the problem is, these are correct informations, but nobody tries to look into the reason why this thing happens. Because mostly the people, after gaining formal education, the indigenous children, they are not employed in proper jobs because of the racial stereotyping and racial discrimination. They are not considered to be ideal employees. And moreover, they're living on welfare money. There's something called welfare money, which is
yeah,
paid by the Canadian government, which just pays enough money for their food. As if you get food to eat, you will not have any more requirements in life. So, which is not obviously sufficient for their well-being. So finally, what happens is that people are into substance abuse. Women, for the lack of any better employment, turn towards prostitution. Men are getting increasingly into law breaking, into different kinds of minor stealing activities. Many of them are frustrated, are committing suicide, and that is again reinforcing the already present stereotypes. So it is a kind of a vicious circle that they have got into. So it's very difficult to come out of that.
and someone like Lee Maracle belongs to both worlds, being a university professor
Yes,
and
yes.
yet being someone who has traditional knowledge, or at least trying her best to preserve it in her through her writings. And
Yeah, it is these people like these who are actually trying to build a bridge between the indigenous knowledge system and the mainstream knowledge system.
yeah, so it finally comes to that, because whatever has been ravaged in the past has been ravaged. So straddling two worlds, it seems to come to that.
Yes.
Thank you. I think it's almost dinner time.
Very, yes.
Yeah, and people have been dropping out of the call, but we had a great discussion. Thank you. Thanks, Srilata. Thanks.
Yes, Polash,
Thank you,
your
Udmi.
name is the name of that flower, isn't it?
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
It's flower.
I have been wondering, that Palash red, the
Oh,
red,
that's a flower.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The Battle of Plassey, red.
Ah,
Yes, ma'am.
Right, the battle was, I mean, it laid the field, made the field red. It's like
Oh,
the gulmohar flower. We call it
Yes.
gulmohar actually. It isn't. Polash is a
Mm.
different red color flower.
It's a red hue in the after the sunset. We find in the red hue in the sky. That is the polish. That's the polished color. And when I was introduced in the department, then somebody was saying that, "Oh, you got the right place. You were Polish and you were in the Adivashi studies. That's well and good. Okay, carry on. Go ahead." It was how I was welcomed to the department. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very
So
much
it is not,
for giving me this
you are
opportunity.
a male given a flower name. That's what I wanted to know. But I wanted to know the gender of the flower. Usually, jasmine and things are all women are named. Like
Yes,
Lodi.
in Bengali, actually, all the Polish names are given to the male.
Okay.
I found a particular lady who was named as Polish. That's my. I found one lady in my whole lifetime that she got the name Polish. But generally, Polish, the name Polish is given to the males or to the boys.
I've been curious from the start, so I thought when you're leaving, at least I should ask you
Yes.
why you have been named after that flower.
I
One
don't know.
last thing, Palash, before the call ends. You
Yes,
were
ma'am.
talking about the Lodha community, and I think you were talking about the decriminalization of the tribes, so the
Yes,
denotified tribes. Okay.
yes,
So
ma'am.
there are many other denotified tribes, mainly in the western area, okay, Maharashtra, Gujarat. And I would suggest you look into the works of Ganesh Devi. Okay,
Yes.
Ganesh Devi
Yes,
is one of the
yes,
most
yes.
prominent scholars who have worked in this area. And maybe since you're so interested in field visits, you have already done a few, you can visit the Bhasha Academy in Gujarat, because that is one of the places which works extensively for preserving what you're calling indigenous knowledge systems. So I'm sure you will not be disappointed in that area, because the kids of the indigenous communities are being schooled in their traditional knowledge. What you were talking about, that the youth do not know about their own culture. So maybe sometime you can visit that place, and Ganesh Devi's works, please go through that. That would be helpful for your research, I think.
Yes, ma'am. I'm theorizing G.N. Devi's theory, like after amnesia, what he said in after amnesia, and India, the language, aboriginals, and other things like painted words, and how he theorized the word aphasia, and all the things are included in my research. And thank you, ma'am, for the session. I will definitely try to visit the Bhasha Academy in Gujarat, because he talked a lot about the indigenous languages and how the language has been shifted through the ages and through the generations, and how through the language they are losing their identity. Actually, language is the identity of
It's
the
a
community.
nomad called Thief. That was one of the
Yes,
first books I
a
read.
nomad called Thieves. Yes, yes. I'm just reading. Started reading this book also. Thank you, Shengupta ma'am, for your suggestion that I should visit Bhasha Academy in Gujarat. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
can we wind up the session today? Um,
Yes. Nivedita.
Nivedita, who's
Yes,
yeah, Nivedita, yeah.
yes. As we come to the close of this enlightening and engaging session, it's my privilege to extend a heartfelt vote of thanks to all. First and foremost, I'd like to express our deepest gratitude to our esteemed keynote speaker, Dr. Urmi Sengupta, for your inspiring and thought provoking address on understanding indigenous narratives. To our paper presenter, Mr. Parash Biswas, your dedication and hard work was evident in the quality of your presentation. The depth of your research has enriched our understanding on Adivasi narratives through their poetry. We appreciate your efforts in advancing this discourse. Both of you, your personal anecdotes and insight have set a powerful tone for today's topic and have given us much to reflect upon. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. A special thanks to our principal, Dr. Uma Maheshwari, who has always supported us to ensure the smooth execution of every aspect of this event. We deeply appreciate your faith in our visions, ma'am. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Maria Preeti Srinivasan, Head of the Department of English at QMC, convener and club in charge of the In Tandem Research Club. Your unwavering dedication has been instrumental in the success of our club. I also take this opportunity to express a sincere appreciation to everyone associated with the club, including our esteemed patrons, Dr. Rufus sir and Dr. Srilata ma'am, as well as our dedicated club board members and support team, whose efforts have been invaluable. Lastly, I'm immensely grateful to our audience. Thank you for being a part of our research club journey. As we conclude, let us carry forward the ideas sparked here today and use them to make impacts impactful contributions on resilience, recuperation, resistance, reclamation, and re-empowerment. Have a wonderful evening. This is Nivedita Jairash, PhD Research Scholar, Department of English, QMC, signing off on behalf of Internum Research. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Urmi. Thank you, Palash.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thank you, ma'am.
Nivedita.
Good night. Take care, ma'am.
Good night.
Thank you all. Good night. Bye bye.